first reading is taken from the book of Haggai, chapter 1, beginning to read at verse 3. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your panelled houses while this house remains a ruin? Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build the house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, said the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its cropped. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain and the new wine. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
And our second reading is Matthew chapter 20, beginning at verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace, doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went, and he went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, and did the same thing. About the 11th hour he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" I think we need to go on a bit further. I suddenly realise this is a bit short. So what's this 20? Matthew 20. Just okay. Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? Because no one has hired us, they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These people who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "Friends, I'm not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good evening. And thanks to Michael for not leaving us in suspense and delivering the punchline on the parable. Is the mic on? Yeah? We good? Yeah, okay. So let's just start with a quick word of prayer. So Father, I ask that you would take the words that I'm going to speak and speak to the people here tonight, wherever they may be spiritually and mentally, and that you would bring your kingdom to this place. Amen. Okay, so we're continuing with the somewhat strangely titled book, 12 Dead Men Speak. I find that slightly bizarre. Am I the only one that finds that a slightly bizarre title for a book? Well, a few people responding, so maybe it's not just me. So, Bible trivia. Which is the shortest book in the Bible, in the Old Testament? Nope. Obadiah. And Haggai is the second shortest. So there we are. So you're now all well equipped for the next pub quiz. So Haggai was a prophet who encouraged the returned exiles of Israel to rebuild the temple, and the kind of like the parallel story to this is in Ezra 5, 6, and so on. And Haggai apparently means festal, which may indicate that Haggai was born during one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts. Take notes for the next church trivia quiz, which are the unleavened bread, Pentecost, or the Festival of Weeks, and Tabernacles. So there we go. And Haggai, if you look at chapter 2, verse 3, it seems that Haggai may well have witnessed the destruction of Solomon's temple. And if that was the case, then he would have been in his 70s when this book was written. So for those of us that aren't in our 70s yet, I have to say that to have the energy to be able to do that, I find quite breathtaking, because I'm not in my 70s and I'm not sure I have that amount of energy. But anyway, that's me. So at 538 BC, we've got Cyrus, the king of Persia, issuing his decree to allow the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And about 50,000 Jews journeyed home and began working on the temple. About 2 years later, in around 536, they completed the foundation, and there was great rejoicing. You can find that in Ezra 3. But their success upset the Samaritans and the other neighbours who feared Israel, and they opposed the project, and they stopped work until after Darius becomes the king of Persia. So Darius, unlike maybe the previous kings, emperors, rulers, was interested in the religions and the regions, and we know that he was actually quite supportive of this. And again, you can read the kind of like the historical chronology of this in Ezra. And the great thing about Haggai is that these messages are amongst the most carefully and precisely dated in the entire Old Testament. And they're actually given, Haggai covers a period of about 4 months in the second year of King Darius's rule. And the first message was delivered on August the 29th in our calendar, and the last on the 24th day of the 9th month, which is December the 18th. So, quite a tight period of time. So just to have a quick look at the structure of the book, I decided it wasn't really fair to get anybody to read the whole thing out, even though it's not that long. So in the first chapter, we've got the first message from God to Haggai, which is to rebuild God's temple. That's the thrust of chapter 1. And it involves lots of R's: rebuke, reflection, divine discipline, that hasn't got an R in it, and repentant response. But it's basically, chapter 1 is God saying to his people, I'm with you. And then we've got the second, third and fourth messages from him from God through Haggai, which are basically to take courage, I will bless you, and I have chosen you. But there is a gap between those two chapters, which is, again, very precise, of almost a month. And in that time, nothing on the surface of it seems to be happening. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So what's happening in chapter 1? So the Israelites have returned with hope, vision, enthusiasm, and want to rebuild the temple. And they have got the foundations down. But let's remember that in the ancient world in that time, the status of you as a nation and the status of your God was judged by the quality of the temple, because the temple was where God, whatever your nation's God was thought to live. So the more important and grand the God, the more important and grand the temple. There's a direct relationship there. And obviously we would say that God dwells in this church, but we would say that God is indwelling in us. And that's covered in 1 Corinthians 6 and 1 Corinthians 3. But for those people, the temple was really important. So Haggai has fantastic bluntness, the true Yorkshireman of the ancient world, but also fairly typical of the Old Testament prophets and leaders who do not hold their punches. So, he kicks off, as he means to go on, with, you've believed a lie, chapter 1, verse 2. You have the wrong priorities. You have poor results. And then we have the kind of like the summary of all of that in verse 9. And I think in modern days, if we looked back at that, this whole business of you've believed a lie, I think we would say, well, Satan is called the father of lies in Revelation 12. So I think we would say that there's definitely a spiritual dimension to this. So chapter 1 is, starts off quite brutally, and that's the bit that Wendy read out. But then in between chapters 1 and 2, in this gap, I like to think that the people have spent some time praying, listening, and reflecting, following Haggai's refocus of them from building their own houses, from their own business, to trying to refocus them on God. The people get discouraged, understandably. We're all humans, I'm sure we can all identify with that. And the response from God is then in chapter 2 is that great encouragement. But I think the thing I wanted to kind of stress, which I don't think really comes out when you just read Haggai as a book, is that there is this period in the middle. And I would like to think there's no basis for this. I want to be clear, this is the interpretation of Kate rather than the interpretation, and commentators, rather than, God says. But I'd like to think that the people in that time were really reflecting and refocusing their values from their panelled houses to thinking about the ruin of God's temple and what they needed to do. So God, in chapter 2 then, God starts to encourage them to rebuild this temple and assuring them that the future glory will be great. And the Jews at that time were a much reduced community from where they'd been before. They were under Darius, who was not a Jew, but the Lord says here that he will shake up the present world order and assert his claim to all the world's wealth, so that the glory of the future temple will be without rival. And the exhortation here in chapter 2, verse 4, to be strong, is actually very similar language to Joshua. And those of you who are of a certain age may well remember memory verses, which I don't know that they really happen as much as they used to. But Joshua, God says to Joshua, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." And then again, God says to Joshua, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." I was actually taught those memory verses to the words of a Kylie and Jason song, which, and I've just been smirking inwardly, because there's all, obviously with, Ramsey Street, Neighbours, thank you. I couldn't remember what it was called for a second there. But, there's been a lot of focus recently on Kylie and Jason, so I have been really struggling with the theme tune of Neighbours and all of that running through my head. So sorry about sharing that with you. It's not in the Bible. But there, God is saying to Joshua, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged. And using very, very similar language and terminology here in Haggai. So that means that God wanted the people to be strong and courageous and bold. So to take another theme then, Haggai shows the consequences of disobedience and then compares that with obedience. So when the people give priority to God and building God's house, they're blessed rather than cursed. And obedience brings the encouragement and strength from God. And the desired of all nations will come and fill this house with glory. So that's chapter 2, verses 6 to 7. And when I was reading this, for those of you, I don't know how many people know Handel's Messiah well, but as I was reading the book of Haggai, I just got all of that wonderful music, choruses, just going through my mind. So if we haven't read Haggai because we didn't really have time tonight, but it is well worth, and just kind of like, if you like Handel's Messiah, just read through it, and there's a lot of the themes, the phrases used in Messiah are in this book, which I really like. So we will now temporarily leave Haggai and go and think about the other passage. So I realised fairly recently, like when I was preparing for this, that I had a mental league table of parables. The parable of the Good Samaritan, Good Shepherd, Prodigal Son, Vine and the Branches were my championship league parables. Multiple layers of meaning, multiple themes, hugely rich, and you can talk for hours on any one of them. Fantastic, fantastic parables. This one was actually probably in my second division of parables in my mental pecking order. I don't know if any of you have a mental pecking order of parables, but anyway. But I've always thought of this one as being short, simple, lacking in complexity. And to be honest, if I've ever heard a sermon on it, I've long forgotten the detail of it. And it was simply that God can use anyone. Reward for all of us is the same. There is no performance-related pay in the kingdom of heaven. And that is the summary of this parable given in the well-known commentary called BBC Bite Size, beloved of teenage children revising for GCSEs and A-levels. And that's true, but I think there's a little bit more to it. So this parable is unique to Matthew. It doesn't exist in any of the other Gospels. But the stories that surround this parable, we've got the parable of if you want to just flick to it in your Bibles, and because this is what you're supposed to do. When you're looking at a passage in the Bible, you look what comes before, what comes after. But we've got a number of other parables here, and it's all to do with people leaving everything. And this parable and Jesus' prediction of his death, James and John's request, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So this parable almost seems to interrupt the general flow, but I think actually it's a story directly connected to discipleship issues, possessions, and authority. The landowner here, or household master, is a common analogy for God. The landowner's question, "Are you envious because I'm generous?" apparently translates from the Greek as, "Is your eye evil because I am good?" And an evil eye suggests a deeper problem than just on the surface. So if you have the evil eye, your whole body is full of darkness. And in this account, the evil eye was the opposite of generosity. It was jealousy, it was greed, it was stinginess, and it was focus on the earthly and not the heavenly. And so when I really started to think about this parable, I think that there are significant parallels with this in Haggai. Because what Haggai is saying to the people is, you need to focus on God and not your earthly stuff. And I think that that's exactly what this parable is saying. You know, the denarius pay was the fair pay for the day. That was what God had promised the people. But it was when they started focusing on what other people were getting, and they started getting greedy, and they started getting self-centered, that's when the jealousy, the evil eye came in. And I think as Christians, we can have problems with that as ourselves. Social media, social groups, you know, that's all terribly important. But if our focus, if our reference point isn't on God the landowner who has given us enough, we can get very disheartened and dispirited. So we need to stay close to Jesus and not be distracted by the chaos of the world. And furthermore, a lot of us will probably have or have had annual performance reviews at work, maybe financial reviews with our accountant or advisor, car insurance renewals, house insurance renewals. We go through reviews for all of these things. But how many of us have actually had a spiritual review? Kind of like an annual spiritual review. Some of us might even have annual medical reviews. And yet, several times in Haggai and here, the people are being told, you need to focus on God. And I guess for me, the challenge for us is, do we have those close friends, that prayer triplet, that fellowship, to be able to receive that spiritual MOT from somebody, to be able to be told, well, actually, you know, I think that you are getting a bit arrogant here, that you need to focus on this. I think that you need to revisit your giving. You know, how many of us have the friends, the relatives around us that can do that for us? And how many of us would actually want to do it? And I think that there's maybe, as we come out of COVID, things are difficult, but I wonder if we need to be doing some sort of a spiritual review. I'm not good at doing this. I don't always pray at the start of every day about the people I'm going to come into contact with. I sometimes hit the ground at 90 miles an hour at stupid o'clock in the morning to talk to Singapore or whatever. But I think that that's something that I felt challenged to do. And I think it's very easy to let the problems of the world distract us. But the answer is that we need to focus on God and his plan for us. Maybe God's telling us to donate a couple of tins of food a week or money directly to the Watford Food Bank. Maybe it's to donate to the Watford School Trust, the New Hope Trust, Open Doors, any one of the amazing charities. Maybe it's to offer our time or our gifts to the church or to another charitable organisation. And maybe, actually, it's to stop doing something that we're doing. that we like doing, to let somebody else come into that and grow in that and give us the time and the space to do something else. So, returning to Haggai, we have some amazing promises in here from God. God promises, I am with you, chapter 1, verse 13. God promises, I will fill this house with glory, in chapter 2, verses 7 and verse 9. God promises, I will bless you, in chapter 2, verse 19. And God promises, I will take you, I will make you, for I have chosen you, in chapter 2, verse 23. So in summary, I think we need to give careful thought to our ways. And let's think about maybe doing that spiritual review to think about what it is that we're doing. Let's focus on God and his kingdom. And let's worry less about comparing ourselves to others. And I'd like to finish with the words from Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, perfect, and pleasing and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. Amen.